Thank you, Acting Deputy President. I rise to reflect today on the value of the resources sector in this country historically and indeed in the present day and going forward. Of course, historically we often forget, Acting Deputy President, the importance of the resources sector in each of our then colonies, now states, your own then colony of Victoria. The influx of people in the 1840s and 50s into Bendigo and Ballarat chasing gold from all around the world, from China, from America and of course from Ireland, England, etc. When you look at Queensland, for example, the Maranoa with its rich gas fields, the Surat Basin and the Bowen Basin, and soon to be opened up, of course, the Galilee Basin in Tasmania. The west coast of Tasmania's economy for a long time was dependent on mining. Savage River, of course, in the north, a very rich iron ore deposit. In South Australia, Olympic Dam, underpinning the economy of that state with its mining activities, and of course in the home state of Senators Cash and Smith and myself, again historically when gold reduced on the Victorian fields, of course so many Victorians came across to Coolgardie, Kalgoorlie and Norseman. Indeed, it's the fact that Western Australia wouldn't have joined the Federation had it have not been for the overwhelming number of Victorians who said, if you don't support Federation, we'll form our own state. And of course it was that caused Winthrop Hackett of the Western Australian newspaper and Sir John Forrest to urge that we did join the Federation, and that's why Western Australia is not named in the early words of the Constitution. But of course more recently the goldfields today continues. The Golden Mile, still one of the biggest gold producers, and indeed the open cut is the largest open-cut gold mine in the world, and of course more recently, over the last 30 to 40 years, the opening up of the Pilbara, Mount Newman and on the coast with the oil and gas activities. Acting Deputy President, I had the privilege last evening of attending the Minerals Council of Australia 50th anniversary function and the launch by Professor Ian Harper of the Deloitte Access Economics review into mining and into what they call METS, Mining Equipment, Technology and Services sector in this country. And I commend this report because of its importance, not historically now, but in the present day and going forward. And Acting Deputy President, I think these figures are remarkable, and I will quote them from the Deloitte Access Economics report. The total economic contribution of Australia's mining and METS sector in 2015-16 was $237 billion. The mining and METS sector in 2015-16 was $237 billion, representing 15% of the Australian economy. And further, the report goes on to say the economic activity supported a total of 1.139 million full-time equivalent jobs across Australia, representing 10% of total FTE employment in this country. That was the last full financial year. In the Pilbara of WA, total economic activity of mining and METS just under $38 billion, representing 88% of its activity. In the Surat-Bowen Basin in Queensland, $18.6 billion, representing 63% of regional economic activity. And in the Hunter region of New South Wales, with total economic contribution from mining and METS of $15.2 billion, representing a third of economic activity. Let me just repeat that figure because I think it's remarkable. In 2015-16, the contribution of the mining and METS sector was $237 billion, representing 15% of the economy and 1.14 million FTE jobs across the country. Acting Deputy President, the point being made also in the Access Economics Deloitte's report was the fact that whilst productivity is phenomenal, we must ceaselessly move to increase productivity. And again, I made the point only recently in this place that BHP Billiton and Rio Tinto are indeed the two biggest taxpayers in this nation. And when royalties and resource rent tax were taken into account 2 years ago, BHP Billiton paid more than $8.7 billion to the Australian government and state governments, particularly our own, and representing some 47%. That's their tax rate, 47%. And Rio Tinto in 2015 paid in excess of $1.5 billion in tax and another $1.4 billion in royalties to either the federal or to the state governments. It is critically important that we in Australia understand the importance of the resources sector and indeed the fact that it underpins regional activity in Australia. In the Hunter Valley, 94,000 jobs in 15-16 from the resources sector. In Queensland, in the Bowen-Surat Basin, 100,000 jobs alone. In the Pilbara, 93,800 jobs from that sector. But of course, if we are to see continuing value to the Australian economy, continuing value for employment, particularly high-value employment, we must extend the productive life of mines, we must get better yields, we must continue to drive safety, occupational health and well-being, and of course we must continue to apply the knowledge of research. And for those who have had the opportunity of going to both BHP and Rio's facilities in Perth to watch the management of mine sites, the loading of trains, the conduct and transport of freight, the actual loading onto ships, all done automatically from Perth, from St George's Terrace in the case of BHP and from the Perth airport, just shows the level to which Australian resource technology is at the forefront. And of course we know this when we speak about other countries in which mining activity is undertaken. We know that most of the mining activity in Africa is managed from within 1 kilometre of the Premier's office in West Perth. In Panama, it is not known, the world's largest copper mine is being built at the moment by Western Australian expertise through First Quantum. Our opportunities in Mexico for particularly mining, drilling and mining equipment is absolutely legendary. And the future for young Australians, for high-value employment and indeed for export opportunities for that sector is enormous. In the few minutes left available to me, I just want to reflect on the comments of the head of Chevron, Mr Nigel Hearne, only on 1 week ago, on the 21st of March, the $100 billion Gorgon and Wheatstone projects. And I like to compare that $100 billion with the total value. If the Snowy Mountain scheme was built today, it would be $9 billion Australian dollars, less than 10% of Gorgon and Wheatstone. But what will those two projects alone deliver to the Australian economy over the 30-year life of Gorgon and Wheatstone, Acting Deputy President? More than $1 trillion to Australia's GDP. 150,000 full-time equivalent, high-paying jobs over that 30-year lifetime, and about $340 billion to the federal revenues of this country. Now, that is just the Wheatstone and Gorgon projects out at $100 billion. You can double that figure when you look at other LNG projects either underway or planned. But of course we must have in this country, we must have good laws, we must have a fair taxation scheme, we must have a capacity to be able to compete with the rest of the world, because it's a highly competitive world in which we live. But in conclusion, I do recommend to those listening who may have an interest, Deloitte Access Economics' review launched last night into the value of the resources sector in this country. It is new information, and it is information all thinking Australians should have.